All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this Ask CASA session. I'm Jordan Becker, the program manager with CASA, and with us today, we have a few members of the DA's office. This presentation is going to be fully focused on trauma, which is incredible because that is intertwined into every single one of the cases that you guys serve on, whether current, past, or any that you will have in the future. So I do just highly encourage you all to try your hardest to tune everything in the world out while you listen in on this. Please feel free to participate. You can ask questions, state comments in the chat, whatever you guys need to do. But we're very happy to have them here with us today. I'm going to pass it off to Joe Early. He is the district attorney in Worcester County. Some of you may be familiar with his name, familiar with him. So he's going to start us off. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Jordan. And I'm going to be brief, guys. Going to be turning it over to Sue. But I just wanted to welcome everyone. Thank you to participate in today's training. Trauma really is kind of a hot button issue for all of us. And the more we learn about trauma, the better we all are. And we've got a couple great programs that Ellen Miller and Sue are working on with regards to our Handle with Care program, where we might see a child traumatized in the home, goes to school the next day, and we're training the police officers and a lot of our educational experts, when they see issues, when they know a child is involved, just to call up with a 3-word message, Johnny Jones, Handle with Care, and they get a warm hug. Where in the past, it might have been an instance where they got a detention for falling asleep in class, not being prepared for a test. Too often we know that child ends up in school for the first bell. And it's one of the ways we're looking to get better. Sue Bahnan's here today to talk about some of the trauma that you deal with. But we work closely with CASA. We got a great history with CASA. And the DA's office really wasn't involved that much until we came in office, and it was unique because that goes back to about 2007. And our relationship with you has just grown and grown. And I applaud you for the work that you do. You inform the court. You step into roles where, without you guys, so much would be lacking. And the child would suffer, the process would suffer, but we're all better as a result of you. So I thank you for your dedication to this. And it really is God's work. You're doing some of the noblest work there is. Going back to the pandemic a couple of years ago, it changed everything. This made the collaboration with CASA more difficult. It made everything more difficult, but especially dealing with CASA. Now, our goals have never changed. I got elected on the theme of prevention. And one of the best things that we can do is prevent crime from happening, prevent tragedy from happening, prevent the difficult things that go on with children from happening. And the sooner the better. You want to fight incarceration, you do it through prevention measures when kids are young. And our goals have never changed, and it's to work with you to achieve the most positive outcomes that we can achieve for kids. We're all on the front lines, and going alone, you go fast, but going together, you go further, and working together is a force multiplier. I often say, and I'm not the one who came up with it, that children are 20% of our future, 20% of our population, and 100% of our future. But these traumatic events affects what it does to a child. Seeing parents argue, seeing violence in the home, seeing an overdose. We know that the kids who see this have the higher ACEs scores, and that if we don't deal with the trauma, 50% of them are going to end up in the criminal justice system. Also, 50% will end up with a substance use disorder themselves. So as we get smarter, we know we can get better. And this just continues the cycle of trauma. So Sue's going to speak. She's from our community and school outreach. She's at community and school outreach coordinator on the importance of how you handle trauma and identify the children that are struggling with trauma. As you identify these children, though, what you don't often realize is that it impacts you. And Sue's going to explain that. You need to be cognizant of both feelings, the child's and of yours, and what this can do, what you might bring home when you are dealing with people who have been traumatized. So it's going to strengthen your ability to identify how trauma is impacting you, the biological effects of it, and how it impacts you and your colleagues. She's going to talk about the way your nervous system reacts to the trauma and sets the tone as well for the children who are watching you, absorbing this like a sponge, because they turn to you and they look to you to see how, you know, something happened to them, how you're going to react. Our goal, your goal, it's always to make children feel safe and secure. And the one thing I know from all of this and doing this for 18 years now is we can always get better. Each day we get an education. Each day we get an ability to get better through new learning. And I hope you find this training helpful and informative. Sue's been nothing but a rock star for us since she came on. And I'm going to turn it over to Sue. I was at Sue's training the other day, so I'm not going to say stay for the training again. I'm going to stay for just a little bit. But I thank you for being here. And I thank you for what you do. You're doing God's work. Thanks. Sue?
Thank you, DA. Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be here with everyone, as the DA mentioned. My name is Sue. Just to mention, I have a background in neuroscience and in psychology. And so this intersection of nervous system science and on the ground living, our behavior, the quality of our interactions with each other, and the small shifts that we can make to send each other signals of safety and welcome that can buffer against the traumas that we face, that children face, that our coworkers face, really as a community, is a passion of mine. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. And we can get started. Okay. Little. I think you can hide the remote bar. Yeah. Hide loading controls. There we go. Okay. Awesome. All right. So here we are, the nervous system's response to trauma and how to handle with care. Let's see. Okay. So we're going to take a look at the ACE study, and then I want to explore trauma through a unique lens. It's this new field of research called polyvagal science. We're going to take a look at understanding what toxic stress is and some formal definitions of trauma. And then we're also going to connect this to attachment research and the way our early life relationships shape who we are in our nervous system and in our psyche. We're going to specifically look at trauma's impact on learning. And then we're going to discuss how can we be not just trauma informed, but trauma responsive. And we'll cover our awesome program, which is the Handle with Care initiative that the DA discussed. And I have a little self-care box here down in the corner. We're going to be touching on some heavy material. So make sure to take care of yourself, rest if you need to, turn your camera off if you need to, pay attention to your nervous system and honor it as we go. So I love opening up with this. I know that the DA is also passionate about what is your why. I just wanted to take a moment to pause. And before I lay the context of today's presentation out even further, I just wanted you as a CASA representative and advocate to reflect on what gets you up in the morning to do this work and what keeps you in this job. And how might learning about trauma help you in your job? When our positions get difficult and challenging, which they certainly do, knowing what our why is and falling back on our why can be incredibly supportive. So I just wanted to take a moment to touch on that. Also, before we begin, I wanted to lay this context that, this is really a story about connection. Connection is protection. We are wired as mammals for connection, to be with each other, to rely on each other. And it's the connection in our relationships with one another that actually embed within us the resiliency factors that help buffer against any trauma we may experience at any point in our lives. And connection is not just a luxury, and it's not really an extra need. It is written into our biology. It is in our genes. This is our mammalian nature, is to be in connection with one another. And I also wanted to mention that this is not about being perfect. So reciprocity, rupture, and repair in human relationships is perfectly natural. And it's actually through conflict and not getting things right that we're able to come back together, talk things out, meet each other in the middle where it's messy, and actually become stronger as a result. So, and research has shown that even just one powerful, healthy relationship in anyone's life, but especially in the life of a child, can completely change the trajectory of their development and their life. So we're going to dive right in now to the ACE study. So the ACE study was performed in 1998. It's the largest public health study ever done. And it revealed a relationship between adverse experiences in early life and health and well-being later in life. So they were actually investigating why certain people weren't able to keep weight off in a weight loss program. And they were able to realize that unresolved trauma early in life actually had an impact on those who successfully met their weight goals, but then gained all the weight back quite quickly. And they said, there's something going on here that we need to investigate further. And that's where trauma really came into focus. So they created a survey that had 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences. And if you had experienced that, it would be a score of 1, and you would add the score up total at the end. This was about 17,000 participants, so it was a very large study, but it is important to note here that this was a pretty affluent group of people. So this was 75% white, about half female, half male, and overall about 75% of these participants had some degree of college or higher education. So it's important to note that this is a very specific demographic, and that I think only supports the outcomes of the study even more. So they looked at 3 different types of ACEs: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction, and 10 specific categories. So for abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual. For neglect, physical and emotional. And they also looked at mental illness in the home, an incarcerated relative, witnessing the mother being treated violently, any form of substance use, and divorce. And what they were able to find at the end is that 64% of those 17,000 participants, so 2/3, had at least one childhood experience. So this really showed how prevalent trauma is in our society, in our community. And the 3 top ACEs that they were able to see were physical abuse, household substance use, and divorce. So this just really shows how prevalent trauma is, even if you come from a good family and you come from a nice neighborhood, if you are in a good income bracket, so on and so forth. Trauma is pretty prevalent in the United States. They were also able to see that the more ACEs someone experienced, it impacted all areas of someone's life. So physical health, mental health, academic achievement, quality of relationships, workforce productivity, and as a result, earning potential. And this increased the more number of ACEs a person had experienced. So there were increased risk outcomes, both behaviorally and physically, as well as mentally. And they noticed that these childhood traumatic experiences promoted adult onset of a whole host of chronic diseases, anxiety, depression, and other mental illnesses, substance use and addiction, being violent, being a victim to violence, as well as financial and social problems. And so you can see a list of all of these here. They also realized that those who had 4 or more ACEs had a massive increase in chances for developing these various conditions. So we can take a look here and see heart disease increased by 220%, stroke by 240%, diabetes by 160%, depression by 460%. One was 220% more likely to become a smoker had they experienced 4 or more ACEs. 1,030% to use injected drugs. To develop an STD increased by 250%, and to attempt suicide increased by 1,220%. And even more startling was those that had experienced 6 or more ACEs, they found a correlation that one's own life expectancy would be decreased by up to 20 years. So this is massive detrimental outcomes. Then later on, Philadelphia expanded upon this study, and they looked at more urban areas, and they also added 5 additional questions to the original 10. They included witnessing violence throughout the neighborhood. Have you ever witnessed someone being beat up, stabbed, or shot in real life? Have you ever felt discriminated against or experienced, racism? Any other adverse neighborhood experience from a community perspective? Do you feel you can trust those in your neighborhood? Do you feel you can rely on those in your neighborhood? Have you ever been personally bullied? And have you ever lived in foster care? And so combined with the original ACE study, they found that over 80% of people have experienced at least one ACE. So again, massive numbers here. If we think about the room that this virtual room we're in now, it could be anywhere from 65 to 80% of us have experienced at least one ACE. So this brings a sense of compassion on a community level and a sense of urgency to really address trauma, and not only from an informational perspective, but how can we be more responsive in these ways when interacting with others, because we're not always going to know who and what someone's carrying around with them. So this is just a diagram to show realms of ACEs. We covered a few household ones and community ones. There can also be environmental ones. People who live in areas that frequently experience earthquakes or droughts or other climate crises and natural disasters. There can also be shock traumas, like getting into car accidents. And there can also be medical traumas. So having a very poor experience in the medical system, or just being having adverse experiences just through your own poor health over life, if you happen to be born with a genetic disease or something along those lines. This is a great pyramid that the CDC put out to see how there's building blocks, in the sense that things compound on top of one another. So we have generational or historical trauma. This could be if a grandparent went through a Holocaust or a famine. Then we have social conditions. This could be, what is the quality of your water supply in your region? Then we have adverse childhood experiences that we just covered, and how these 3 will then lead into a disruption in neurodevelopment, which we'll look at today. Impairments in social and emotional and cognitive function, which might lead to the adoption of high-risk health behaviors, the onset of disease, disability, and social problems, and potential early death. So ACEs are still events. And now let's take a look deeper into the nervous system of how one might respond to an event. As we all know, no one responds to the same event in an identical way. So it's important to know the various ways that a child can respond to ACEs. So we're going to look through 2 lenses here, polyvagal theory and attachment theory. And we're going to start with polyvagal. So here we have 2 branches of the autonomic nervous system. We're going to have a little walk through some very basic Bio 101. So we've been traditionally taught that we have 2 branches in our autonomic nervous system. We have our parasympathetic and our sympathetic. And the autonomic nervous system is great because it does things automatically. So our heart beating, our blood pressure, digesting our food, keeping our eyes lubricated so we can blink, knowing when we need to go to the bathroom, all these different things that we don't have to think about is our autonomic nervous system makes happen every day. And that allows us to move through the world and get things done and collaborate and build amazing things. So these 2 branches are easily known as our brake pedal and our gas pedal. So our parasympathetic is our brake pedal. And this is what allows us to calm down, rest, and digest. So this is when we're in connection with others, when we feel safe. It allows our food to be digested. It allows our tissues to be repaired. And it's very important to be able to slow down so that we can take a break and allow for restoration. Then we have our sympathetic nervous system, and you can think of this as our internal gas pedal. This is really like the life force of life, right? This is when we need energy to meet a task, when we get excited about meeting a friend, and it's also really important in movement for exercise, and especially movement for defense strategies. So if you're walking across the street and a car jets out in front of you, your sympathetic nervous system will come online and your muscles will move you out of the way. Again, not something you need to think about. And if we did need to think about saving our lives, a lot of the time, we may not. Certainly our ancestors would not have come out of all those situations as quickly as they could have, right? So we think sympathetic increases our arousal, movement, and defense, and the parasympathetic increases our connection, our digestion, and our restoration. So what the polyvagal theory shows us is that there are actually 3 distinct pathways in the autonomic nervous system, and it's now serving as this updated map of the ANS, which is really awesome, and allows us to understand our biology in a way that allows us to become active operators of our own system. You know, we always hear about self-regulation, right? Well, this learning more about how our biology responds to different things then allows us to make the right choices to honor our biology, but also make choices that are in alignment with our goals. So polyvagal, I don't know if anybody here has heard of the vagus nerve. It's the 10th cranial nerve. It's been getting a lot of attention lately. It's a very important nerve because it is the longest nerve in our body. It extends from our brainstem all the way down through our organs. It communicates with all of our organs so that our organs can communicate with our brain, so that everything is being surveillanced at all times. And so polyvagal research expands what we have come to know the vagus nerve to do. So one that I just mentioned is homeostasis. Again, I learned this in class, that the vagus allows us to monitor our internal organs, make sure everything's running as it should, heart rate, blood pressure, water retention, all these things are happening, right? Well, there's also the shifts between autonomic states, which means, are we able to shift into survival and defense states and out of survival and defense states back into states of connection and safety as needed, moment to moment? And what we see is that when we're not able to shift out of these stress states, defense states, and survival states, that's really where suffering happens. That's where our body begins to break down. It's also where we begin to break down on a mental, emotional level and a social level as well. So this whole presentation is about the importance of recognizing that we can shift out of stress states and defense states by looking for cues of safety in our environment and between people around us. And it really solidifies this understanding that human development and well-being is social in nature. We are mammals after all, and we really do need each other. And now we can see this on a nervous system level. So why learn about the autonomic nervous system and polyvagal theory? Well, we've kind of been stuck in a behavioral model. We've really been focusing only on behavior, and really behavior is just the leaf on the branch. If we really want to understand what's happening, we need to go down into the roots, into the soil. That's the source of the problem, or the initiatory point, right? And that's what the autonomic system is. The autonomic system is the first point of initiation in our whole experience. And, you know, I have a master's in neuroscience. I love the brain, but something too that this is showing us is that the brain is not only in the head. It's not only in the skull. We have a huge body brain. Our whole system is a brain. We are a walking brain. And actually, in terms of the pathways that go from the brain into the body, 80% of those pathways go from the body brain to the head brain. And only 20% come down from the head brain into the body. So it's kind of shifting, you know, we're so top heavy, if you will. And it's really bringing down this sense of intelligence and allowing ourselves to trust and respect the reactions that come up from the body. This will seamlessly help us shift out of these states as needed in whatever way is appropriate. And one thing that we also see is that the state we find ourselves in emotionally or mentally is what's born out of the autonomic nervous system. So all sensations, feelings, emotions, thoughts, beliefs, all the stories we construct to make sense of our own experience and our experience of others and our experience of the world, emerge out of an autonomic state. So you can see this picture here that on the left, this sort of green, blue, maybe this is this is a more relaxed autonomic state where we're in that parasympathetic relaxation. You can see that the story is smooth. And on the right side here, if we're in a state of defense or life threat, we have a chaotic story. And that's really where this conflict tends to happen. So autonomic state governs attention and creates story. So now let's take a look at these three distinct pathways. So we know about the sympathetic nervous system and we know about the parasympathetic nervous system, but the discovery was that there are actually two distinct pathways within the parasympathetic vagus nerve. So instead of thinking of the parasympathetic vagus nerve as a simple cord that's singular, you can think of it more as like a fiber optic cable that has multiple cords inside of it. So here we can see our ventral vagal social engagement system, and you'll see that in green on the map there. We also have our dorsal vagal immobilization or shutdown system, that's there in red, and our sympathetic mobilization or defense system, and that's there in yellow. So let's look at the ventral vagal system. So this is our heart-face connection, and this system unites the autonomic nerves of the face, the ears, the voice or vocal cords with the heart and the lungs. And through this system, we project our emotions and our physiological states on our face and our voice. So when you say, how you doing? And someone's like, fine. Yeah, they're not fine. That's because the ventral vagal is maybe not online as much, and we can hear that through the voice. So then we have our dorsal vagal immobilization and shutdown system. This is that internal brake system, and this unites the autonomic nerves of the heart with the internal organs and the gut. And it's through this system that we regulate the function of our digestion, that we modulate different pain thresholds, and also our consciousness levels. So if somebody were to faint while getting a tattoo, let's say, it's because their dorsal vagal took over. And then we have our sympathetic mobilization and defense system, our internal gas pedal. This system unites the autonomic nerves of the heart and lungs with the skeletal muscles. So this increases the heart to get blood and oxygen to the muscles so that we can activate, we can energize, we can move. And this is increased arousal, alertness, and overall movement. Okay, so here we have some organizing principles of the polyvagal theory, and I think it's quite important to take a look at these. So first and foremost, we have neuroception. Neuroception is incredibly important because it is the autonomic neural detection of safety and threat, inside, outside, and between. So inside your body, outside in your environment, and between you and other people. This is a below awareness detection. That means that your nervous system, through your peripheral vision, through the senses in your body, is constantly scanning the world to make sure that if a cue of danger or life threat is detected, that it can act fast and save your life. And whether you're working on a project or having coffee with a friend or working with a child, your neuroception never sleeps, and it is constantly making sure that you are safe. And if you're not, it is mobilizing you or immobilizing you appropriately. And it's important to say that the shifts between these autonomic states happen, your autonomic nervous system is a brain in of itself that makes choices without your conscious input. Doesn't care if it's socially acceptable or convenient or not. Your survival is the utmost important, top priority. So it is going to shift in and out of these various states, whether you like it or not, until you learn to interact with your nervous system in a way that you can develop different regulation skills. But either way, neuroception, detection without awareness. Then we have co-regulation. And co-regulation is basically the cues of safety and threat sent between different nervous systems. So between you and another person. And this is like the foundation of autonomic regulation. It is a biological imperative. Human babies cannot regulate their own nervous systems by themselves. It's through the caregiver relationship. It's through the oxytocin that's released in that bonding relationship that drops cortisol levels and allows their sympathetic nervous system to relax and bring them back into a state of rest and parasympathetic connection. And it's really, that's how we lay down the tracks that develop into volitional self-regulation. And it's through co-regulation. Of course, yes, when you're an infant, but all throughout life. I mean, if you have a bad day, you call your friend, you call your mom, you call your partner, what have you. It's because the co-regulation that we get from those in our lives calms our nervous system. And co-regulation happens before self-regulation and continues to be a lifelong need. The other thing is that the autonomic nervous system is a hierarchy, and it does predictably move up and down this hierarchical scale depending on how safe or in danger you feel. And it gives rise to what Stephen Porges, who's the developer of this theory, calls neural platforms of behavior. So you can think of it as like you're standing on a stage and certain feelings or behaviors will be accessible to you and others will not, depending on the neuroception of your autonomic nervous system. And it's important to mention that this really colors our world. Depending on what autonomic state we are in, everything changes. Our physiology changes, the way we think changes, the way we feel changes, the way we interpret things in our environment changes. And again, the behaviors available to us change as well. So I just wanted to show this, the evolution of our autonomic nervous system, because sometimes we can be a little hard on ourselves, and we can be like, oh, I did that thing again. Well, it's important to know that these parts of your nervous system are hundreds of million years old. So as a child, specifically, we can focus in on children in this example, we say, control your behavior, control yourself. Well, they're learning to control themselves through co-regulation, through us adults modeling that behavior for them. But really, these are, maverick style waves, if you think. You can think of them that way. This is immense energy behind these different autonomic states. And so it just really shows us that, yes, we do have choice, but choice is a muscle. And we need to exercise that muscle so that it can learn to cohabitate with the neuroception, with the innate power of our nervous system. There's another piece I wanted to mention here, and that is the vagal brake. So typically, mammals out in the wild, being immobile only usually came with fear, because if you are immobile, you're an easier target. But as we evolved, we were able to engage in both sympathetic activation and immobility without fear. We've become really sophisticated mammals, and it's because this vagal brake. So you can think of the vagal brake as a brake on a bicycle, that as you're going down a hill, when you engage the brake, you slow down, and when you release the brake, you speed up. And that has to do with our heart rate. So it connects directly to our heart rate. And when the vagal brake is engaged, our heart rate slows down. When the vagal brake lifts, our heart rate speeds up. And that's what allows us to shift in and out of these states, not only when we need to in a defense situation, but also it's what allows us to be passionate and enthusiastic and creative. It allows us to move through grief in a way where we still feel safe. So the vagal brake is really what gives us this massive, eclectic range of experiences as human beings. So the hierarchy, here we are again. And I just wanted to make it very clear that, so when we feel safe, our ventral vagal system comes online. And this goal is relaxation, connection, engagement with others, as well as digesting our food and restoration. And it's important to note here that it's never that only one of these are on at one single moment. The ventral vagal system really oversees the whole nervous system, so that the sympathetic is giving us the energy we need, and our Dorsal is allowing us to sit still and read a book if we need to, or digest our food if we need to. So it's really like the ventral vagal is like the CEO, and they're able to oversee and make decisions in a way that is healthy and socially acceptable as well. When we do feel danger, we will step down the hierarchy into a sympathetic state. And the goal here is energizing activation, defending oneself for self-protection through fighting or running or freezing. If that danger is perceived through our neuroception to be too insurmountable and overwhelming, we will go down the ladder once more, and we will enter what is called a state of life threat. And that's when we'll enter the dorsal immobilization. And the goal here is energy conservation. And it will also release endorphins for physical or emotional pain that's just too much to cope with. So again, the ventral vagal social engagement system is energy balancing. The sympathetic is energy demanding. It's very metabolically costly to be in a sympathetic state because we're using our energy reserves to fight or run from this danger, which is also why staying in a sympathetic state for decades can be deteriorating for a human. And the dorsal vagal is energy conserving. So we really shut down as a way to conserve our energy. So now let's take a look at these neural platforms. Stephen Porges says that there are 4 what he calls pure states. I like to think of them more as dominant states because it's really what's the loudest in the moment. So we have social engagement here on the, sorry, just gonna hide these control panels again. Okay, great. We have the social engagement here on the left, and this state is active and exists on a continuum of safety. So we feel relaxed, we feel curious about our environment, we can connect with ourselves, connect with others, we're able to access compassion and empathy, creativity, we're able to feel hopeful and as if the world is full of possibility. And also our heart rate and our muscle tone is normal. And you can see here down at the bottom that the executive state is what comes online. So our frontal cortex that's able to problem solve and weigh different social behaviors, think abstract thoughts, so on and so forth. Then we have our sympathetic in the middle here, and this is our fight and our flight. So fight exists on the emotional continuum of anger, from irritation to anger to rage. Flight exists on the emotional continuum of fear, so worry, anxiety, terror. And in these states, we have increased heart rate, blood pressure, and hormonal flow. Our muscle tone is tight. And it's important to note here that the consciousness that we enter into when we're in this sympathetic state is inherently us versus them. You know, we get into a mode where we need to identify and defeat a threat. So it's important, you know, it was important for our ancestors to know who's with me and who's against me. So when you think of the term picking a fight, it's actually based in your nervous system. You know, your nervous system is trying to identify the threat, and it will place it on something, even if that something was not actually threatening or intending to do harm to you. And you can see that that's really the emotional state. So that limbic system is really overactive in the midbrain area. And then we have shutdown, and that's the dorsal vagal. And this is really a continuum of dissociation. So it can be benign, like daydreaming, you know, and zoning out. But of course, if you're in a classroom or you're at work where you need to get things done, being absent-minded and zoning out, you know, feeling numb and moving through the motions, not connecting with yourself or anyone. And of course, on extreme levels, dissociation, depersonalization. And when dorsal is truly fully online, you lose consciousness and pass out. So usually it's some form of hybrid state. And you can see that really what becomes the priority as far as your brain is that brain stem. So it's just focusing on keeping yourself alive, but doing it in a way that's energy conserving. And here we have some hybrid states. So there can be blended states where some of these are online at the same time. So here on the left, we have intimacy. And intimacy is where both the ventral vagal safety is online, but also that dorsal immobilization. So this allows us to be immobile without fear. It allows us to hug and conform our bodies to our caretaker. It allows us to sit and read a book, cuddle with our pet, meditate, different ways that we are immobile in a way that feels relaxing, calming, and restoring. Then in the middle here, we have learning and play. And this is when the ventral and the sympathetic are online at the same time. This is a great place for kids to be. And it's also a great place for learning no matter how old you are. And what we find is that, you know, the juices are flowing, if you will, and you're mobilized and socially engaged. And in this state, if you were to, let's say, pick up on a cue of danger, play would then devolve into competition and conflict. And so I think we can all think back on a moment where we were playing either a sports game or a board game with friends, and then all of a sudden things got competitive and it went from pure fun to like, I want to win now. So that's what happens when that ventral brake will lift and more of the sympathetic will come online. But in a blended state, they're in this fun play. Middle ground here. And then we have freeze here on the right, and this is a combination of sympathetic and dorsal. So this is that classic deer in the headlights experience where your heart is through the roof and your muscle tone is high, but you can't move. I think everyone here has likely had that experience, right? And that's that blended state. There is one more state I wanted to mention, and that's fawn. And this is a unique state where, yes, we're in a sympathetic state where we detected danger, but we actually use our social engagement system as a tool in this state. We use our social engagement in order to fawn on who we might deem the danger. You know, this idea of bringing your enemies closer. You know, it's also a please and appease state where we can meet the needs of that person that might be a source of danger for us in the moment. And possibly by meeting the needs, they can become disarmed as a threat. So this is what they believe was the evolutionary drive behind the sort of fawn state. And here we have all the states here blended together. I just wanted to show you this with the nervous system image here on the right so you can really get an idea. And it's kind of this left L here of social engagement, intimacy, and learning and play. That's really the ideal place for any human to be. And they say, like, even if you're here 51% of the time and the other areas 49% of the time, you're still going to have your needle pointing towards well-being. The problem is most of us spend our lives on this other L between the fight, flight, shutdown, freeze, and possibly fawn response. So how do we send signs of safety and threat? So if we look here on the left, we have verbal communication, and that's just words. But actually in early humans, language was one of the last things to come into evolution. The beginning of our communication was really all nonverbal, and it absolutely continues today. Most of our communication happens nonverbally, and that's through our eyes, our facial expression, our tone of voice, vocal sounds, grunts, head movement, posture, gestures, the intensity with which we speak or move, and the timing in which we speak or say certain things. So it's really clear, like, for instance, if somebody smiles, but they don't smile with their eyes, there's a part of your nervous system that picks up on that. And you're like, that wasn't a genuine smile. Again, that example of responding with words of I'm good, but with a tone where you're clearly not good. I think vocal sounds are a good one. You know, if from the other room you hear a friend or a child go, ugh, I mean, that's all we need to hear, right? That person might be in a moment of dysregulated stress. So it's very clear to know that while these very fancy and scientific interventions are certainly needed, sometimes it's just about shifting our nonverbal communication with one another to send signs of safety that disarm someone else's nervous system and send signs of welcome, like, you know, I am a safe person to be around. And in your jobs with children, you know, having soft eyes and a soft voice and moving your head and being interactive as they're interacting with you. These are small but incredibly effective things on a nervous system level that can relax their state. So I'm going to go through a few images here, and you can just take a moment and see how your neuroception deciphers the different cues you receive. So I know I moved through those pretty quickly, but yeah, these are just some examples of these facial expressions and how they can create ever so slight but pronounced shifts in our nervous system when we take them in. So let's take a look now at toxic stress and ACEs. And I am going to move right along the material, but please put questions in the chat as we go if you have them, and I will address them at the end when we can chat with each other. So, as I mentioned, stress is a natural, healthy part of life. It's what allows us to overcome challenges and develop and grow and become resilient. And when it comes to children, when children have a co-regulating parental figure and that support is in their life, they can manage and adapt to stress as it comes, and they can develop those self-regulation skills within that healthy relationship. The reciprocity, rupture, and repair, which is the natural cycle of human relationships, is fine when stress and conflict arise, as long as they have that ability to restore and any rupture that might have occurred. But there are many children that live at home with lions, as they like to say, in an environment where the toxic stress really never goes away because there is a perpetual state of danger or life threat depending on the state of their caregivers. So toxic stress occurs when these children live in a perpetual state of survival. They don't have consistent parental support to help them co-regulate, and they certainly don't experience repairs to any ruptures in those relationships. Again, as a result, the stress response system never turns off, and that is very costly to the body and mind. So I just want to take a brief look at the brain. These three areas specifically are very important. So first we have our prefrontal cortex. It's right here behind our forehead. And this is the seat of our unique personality. It's also the seat of our executive function. So awareness, attention, decision planning, problem solving, memory recall. It also allows us to regulate our social behavior and our emotions and impulse control, as well as having that sense of compassion and empathy for others. And then we have our amygdala, and our amygdala is typically known as the smoke detector in the brain, and that's certainly one of its most important roles because it sounds the alarm to keep you alive. But the amygdala also just plays a general role in emotional memory, and it will tag different things of importance in your experience. For instance, if you were bit by a dog when you were young and it was very traumatic, then dogs become tagged towards a negative way, in the sense that your brain's like, hey, that's important to you because we got hurt last time. So whenever a dog comes around, you might be like, oh no. But likewise, if your grandmother cooked you chocolate chip cookies every time you went over, chocolate chip cookies would be tagged with importance by your amygdala, and it would have this positive reinforcement to it or feeling of emotion to it. So the amygdala plays an important role in your emotional memory, and the hippocampus, which is the seat of our memory creation overall, encodes the different memories we have also emotionally, temporally, which means when did this happen in time, and spatially, meaning where was I and where was this when it happened in space. And so when we experience stress, there are certain chemicals, stress hormones, that are released into the body, and these particular regions, the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, are actually quite sensitive to stress hormones. So let's take a look at this for a moment. So let's say your neuroception picks up a cue of danger in your environment, and the the amygdala detects that and goes off. It then signals to your adrenal glands to release adrenaline, which increases your heart rate and gets that sympathetic energy online. And it also releases cortisol, which basically gives us a lot of fuel. It dumps different fuel reserves into our blood so that we can run or fight this threat. However, while at first that increases our senses and makes our senses more acute, over time, as cortisol and adrenaline build up in the brain, we actually find that the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus go offline because too much cortisol affects the hippocampus, too much adrenaline affects the prefrontal cortex. And now we're finding that the part of our brain that can calm the emotional part of our brain is offline. So we find ourselves very emotionally distressed. We also find that our ability to store that memory accurately also becomes dysregulated. The hippocampus is able to put start and stop tags on experiences, so we know when we recall it later that it's not happening now, it happened in the past and it's over. But the hippocampus loses its ability to do that, and that's typically what we see with flashbacks when it comes to trauma. And in a more benign case, it can also be why, even though you rehearsed what you wanted to say before you confronted your friend, that it wouldn't come out. You couldn't access the information in the way that you rehearsed it beforehand. And it's this interplay between dysfunction in the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. I also wanted to show, just generally speaking, how stress hormones over a long period of time affects our body. Different cardiovascular dysfunction, immune dysfunction, eyesight, migraines, bone density, digestion. So all the different health outcomes that we saw in the ACE study, this chart here makes it clear as to why toxic stress is toxic over a long period of time. So now I just want to take a moment after we learned all that to look at what trauma is and these formal definitions of trauma. So one way we can look at it is trauma is too much, too fast, too soon, for too long. So this is an autonomic response of self-protection to a single event or a series of events that overwhelms one's ability to cope with and integrate their experience. Trauma can happen in an acute way, meaning it's a single event. It can be chronic, which means it's a series of events. It can also be complex trauma, which tends to mean that trauma was embedded within our interpersonal relationships, especially early in life, with caregivers or adults that were really meant to protect us, but then turned out to be a source of danger or threat. And as we've seen, the inability to cope and integrate really interferes with one's ability to experience that safety, that connection, that trust, that emotional stability. It deters us from living in a state of the ventral vagal system where not only we feel safe and curious and compassionate and creative to be a functional person in school and in the world, but also so our body can restore itself and our mind can rest. Another way we can look at trauma is through this lens of connection. So Stephen Porges says trauma is a chronic disruption of connection. Bruce Perry says the most traumatic aspects of all disasters involve the shattering of human connection. So because connection is a biological imperative, chronic disconnection is just inherently traumatic. And typically, we can think of disconnection as when co-regulation opportunities with those caregivers are either unavailable, totally unpredictable, or just flat out dangerous. And so without that supportive co-regulation, children go into states of protection and survival, and they experience overload of toxic stress. And then just as a survival mechanism to dampen down the intensity of what that feels like, they will sever connections. They'll sever connections, not just with caregivers and the environment, but with themselves. They'll begin to shut down their ability to feel themselves in distress because it's just too overwhelming. And then the wiring that develops in terms of self-regulation skills becomes biased towards protection and survival. So one begins to protect themselves in a way that's more combative rather that's more connected. One additional way we can look at what trauma is through this concept of a window of tolerance. So we can think of a window of tolerance as that ventral window. It's kind of this optimal state of arousal. And when we become too activated, we get hyper aroused. When that becomes overwhelming, we can drop down into a hypoarousal. And basically, trauma just shrinks our window of tolerance. And it basically means that our ability to be resilient in any situation can literally shrink over time. And as we begin to learn different ways of bringing ventral back online, certainly working with a therapist, the whole point is actually expanding that window of tolerance again, so that you have a range where you can meet life challenges, have interpersonal conflicts without completely becoming dysregulated. I'm going to move along to the next slide here. So another way we can define trauma, bringing it back to the polyvagal, is that we tend to get stuck in certain autonomic survival patterns. So everybody here, actually like a snowflake thumbprint, each person here has their own unique way that you have developed through many years of life of dealing with different either stresses or overwhelms. And some people tend to be more of a sympathetic person. Some people tend to be more of a shutdown person. So people who are sympathetic, they're the people who are really loud, and they tend to be, they love to debate. They love to get into conflict or engage people in ways that might be intense. And this was just the early life autonomic decision of their nervous system of how to overcome the adversity that was in their life. And so in this regard, safety and co-regulation, that ventral state, feels unfamiliar and feels unsustainable. And the social connections, that intimacy, can even feel unsafe and dangerous. So you begin to see the cycle of they live in sympathetic overdrive, sympathetic distress. They might experience a little bit of ventral connection or even a little bit of immobilization, but then they got to get up and move again. And they're in that sympathetic overdrive again. Some people tend to be in a pattern of immobilization or shutdown. So in this sense, safety and co-regulation feel unfamiliar and unsustainable. And not just social connection, but also the intensity of the sympathetic mobilization feels unsafe and dangerous too, because the nervous system tended to shut down at such an early stage of life. It didn't learn how to navigate these intense emotions and the intense overwhelm that can come with that. And there's really not a lot of learned tools to safely engage with that sympathetic energy. So it can become this cycle of dorsal disconnect, a little bit of sympathetic energy or a little bit of connection, and then back into dorsal disconnect. And in this way, we can also think of trauma as a disconnection in time. So even when cues in our environment might remotely resemble past experiences, we get this onslaught of this habitual pattern. Remember, the hippocampus maybe did not get to put that stop tag on the experience, and we're flooded with this intense either mobilization or shutdown to what we perceive as a danger or threat in our environment. And sometimes that's actually not even in the environment. But again, this is just what the body is used to in terms of jumping to self-protection before anything bad can happen. So we get stuck living in the threatening past rather than living in the benign future. Of course, not all children get to have a benign future. They continue to go home to an unsafe environment, but there are moments of safety as we move through the world, in school, and if we can't take in that nourishment, even if it comes in small doses, then again, we're in that perpetual state. So I just want to move through what this autonomic hierarchy looks like in real time, okay? So let's say Johnny is in his classroom and he's in a ventral vagal state. He's navigating the different problems that are in front of him. He's connecting with his classmates. They're working together. Even though it's a little hard, he's like, I can do this. I can be resourceful and creative. His body's in a state of homeostasis. He is learning. And everything's going well until Johnny's classmate says a mean comment to him and gives him this look. And Johnny's autonomic neuroception receives her tone of voice and her facial expression as threatening, and boom, Johnny has dropped down into a state of fight. And now he's experiencing a deep sense of unease. He can't really think as clearly as he could before. He's not really wanting to connect with people in the same way. He may have had a deer in headlights moment when that first happened, and now there's some cortisol moving through his body and adrenaline, so maybe he starts sweating a little bit, and underneath the hood the digestion system has now become a little bit out of balance. So their play is devolved into competition and conflict, and he doesn't want to socialize anymore. And when the class moves on to the next assignment, he's really not able to focus. So let's say now that they go out to recess and Johnny is on the swing, and Johnny's other classmate looks at him and yells at him to get off the swing, making this face. And Johnny's autonomic nervous system perceives his tone and his facial expressions as threatening, and he moves down the ladder yet again into a parasympathetic shutdown state. And he gets off the swing very meekly, and for the rest of the day, Johnny disappears into the crowd. He doesn't make eye contact with anyone, and he feels this inner sense of hopelessness and shame and loneliness. He isn't really able to complete any work for the rest of the day, and his tummy begins to hurt. So we can really see how, again, if we're already in a state of distress, it can become even easier for us to enter this social shutdown. I now want to move back up the ladder using different visuals this time. And as I said, these neural platforms, these different autonomic states really color our world. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So you just saw this red hue come over the screen as a visual way to portray like we are in an autonomic state where certain things are accessible and certain things are not. So now this child is thinking the world is unwelcoming. Whether this is conscious or not, this is the state of how they feel. They're disengaged in the classroom. They feel lost, whether on the assignment itself or kind of just in general in life. They don't enjoy eye contact. They're like, don't look at me. They're very low energy. They think no one cares. They don't really feel like anyone takes the time to check in on them. They're sleepy. They feel left behind, and they might have a tummy ache. So now let's move up into sympathetic. Again, we have this yellow hue come over the screen. The world is dangerous. They certainly can't focus. They might feel afraid or worried. And now they're in a bit of this confrontational state, right? The us versus them consciousness. And the eyesight becomes suspect, if you will. They're like, what are you looking at? Very high energy. They're like, you don't get it. There's this sort of convinced of like, I'm misunderstood. They might get fidgety. They might be really freaked out by the intensity of their emotions, and they get sweaty. And now we're moving up yet again into ventral. And now the world is full of possibility. Like I can solve a problem, even if it's challenging. They're engaged. They're okay. Maybe it's not rainbows and sunshine. This isn't about painting it in that light, but they're okay enough. They're safe enough. Now eye contact is welcoming. Hey, let's work together. Let's collaborate. Their energy is balanced. They feel supported by the people in their life and the people in the classroom. They're able to be creative and think outside the box, and they're able to have joy. Joy is accessible to them now because they're having fun and they feel relaxed. So I'm going to move along here to attachment theory. And an even earlier scientist within the world of psychology, James Bowlby, also noted that attachment relationships are biological predispositions, and they're evolved to ensure mammalian survival. Gabor Mate says that the human infant has two fundamental needs: attachment, which is connection to their caregiver. So again, not only does the baby need to be fed and cleaned, but that co-regulation between nervous systems allows the baby to calm when they are crying and distressed, and also authenticity, which is connection to self. And this isn't just about, self-expression authentically. This is also about the gut feelings we get and the survival instincts we get that come in the form of body sensations to let us know, like, ooh, this isn't a good idea. I don't think I should go down that alley. This isn't safe. I should leave. And so these are very important elements of authenticity that co-regulation allows to develop. So these are the 4 S's of attachment. This is Daniel Siegel's work. And these are, you can think of as the fundamental building blocks of healthy relationships. So when these 4 S's are present, it leads to what we call secure attachment. So let's take a look at these quickly. So from a child's perspective, I could say, I feel seen. So I feel seen as my unique self. My inner needs are sensed and reliably met. So not only can I be who I am when I go to you, but what I bring to you, you can sense and you can find a way to meet them. Also soothe. So when I am distressed and when I feel dysregulated, I feel seen by you and I feel comforted by you. So through our relationship, I know I can go to you and I will come back into a state of regulation and balance. I can rely on you in that way. And then I feel safe with you. So not only are you going to protect me from threat, but you're not a source of threat yourself, not a source of terror, which can be often experienced in adverse ways by children. And so if ruptures happen in our relationship, I know that you're willing to sit with me and repair this rupture. So I feel safe with you that even if interpersonal conflict arises, that you'll meet me and we'll get through it together. And when these three things are present, this secure model of attachment is developed within the psyche. So the above three create this inner model of feeling secure that you as my caregiver are someone I can rely on, that I can rely on our bond, and that as a result, because you have co-regulated with me and because you have modeled this behavior with me, now I know how to rely on myself. You've been an example of that, and I can rely on the world. I can rely on opportunities in the world. If I have needs with my other social relationships, I can identify those needs. Those needs are worthy of being met, and I can communicate that. So all attachment relationships implicitly ask and answer these 4 questions. Can I rely on your care? Am I worthy of care? Can I rely on my own care? And how caring is our world? So every time we react with children, we are answering these questions in a subconscious way. So let's take a look at models of attachment. And these are learned adaptive responses. Again, they're not necessarily, they're not personality types, and they are relationship specific. So humans engage in something called alloparenting, which basically means that we are raised by a village. That's our origin, actually. And so we kind of have 3 to 5 different slots, if you will, for attachment models. And even though the early life infant experience really does hold a lot of weight, these attachment models remain very malleable through our teen years, between 12 and 14. So we continue to be role models. We continue to affect the nervous system and the psyche of young people as they grow. So we have 1 secure attachment and we have 3 non-secure attachments. So secure attachment is when a child consistently received all the yeses, and this yields the secure self. As a result, this child can regulate their emotions, they can understand and meet their personal attachment needs, they can take healthy risks and assess different risks, and they engage in mutually rewarding social relationships. And luckily, this is 50 to 65% of the general public. Then we have avoidant attachment, and avoidant attachment is when a child does not feel seen or does not feel soothed when they go to their caregiver. And this yields the disconnected self. So because this child goes to their caregiver, but their caregiver does nothing for them, or they make it worse, in a subconscious way, the child's like, well, why am I going to go to you? You really do nothing for me. And the disappointment that I do experience when I go to you is very overwhelming. So as a result, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do it myself. But there really is no doing it yourself. What the mechanism that actually happens is the child will shut down their own attachment needs. They'll minimize their own attachment needs. These are the kids that are like, I don't need anybody. I can do it myself. This also might be the adult that is afraid of commitment and doesn't want to get too deep with a person. And so they disconnect from their own emotions. They disconnect from the real depth of their own self-understanding. And this is about 20% of the general population. Then we have ambivalent attachment, and this is when a child receives inconsistent S's, so 0 predictability, or intrusiveness. And so this yields the confused self. So this often happens with a parent that is either a helicopter parent, like they really don't know boundaries and they over-involve themselves with children in inappropriate ways, or it could be a parent that's completely dysregulated all the time. So the nervous system of the child will just soak up the dysregulation of their caregiver, and they'll mirror that within themselves. And they'll often be like, I mean, I came to you, mom, dad, because I was hungry, and now I feel full of fear or full of rage or full of incompetence. And it begins to blur the boundaries between self and other. The child becomes confused. Is this mine or is this yours? I don't know. And as a result, it can amplify attachment needs because they're just not getting anything met in a way that's predictable or in a way that makes sense. And so these children and adults will also often engage in imbalanced social engagement. These people can be very clingy, very needy. These people can be these are people pleasers. These are different attributes that can develop from this attachment model. And this is about 15% of the general population. And then we have disorganized attachment. And this is when a child experiences terror at the hand of the caregiver. And so this yields the fragmented self. And so it's this unique biological paradox where when we experience a threat, two things happen. We run away. This is programmed in our nervous system. We run away or we move away from the threat, especially a child, and we run towards our caregiver. But when our caregiver is the source of threat, the child doesn't know where to go. And it creates this fragment within the cohesive self. And so it begins to yield dissociation and disconnection. Emotions will become disconnected from memories. Thoughts will become disconnected from actions. This can lead to very disruptive emotional outbursts, things that are not really proportional to what's in front of them. And the person can just become, their sense of self can become dissociated and fragmented. And although this is only about 5 to 15% of the general population in our most adverse families, we do see this in about 80% of children. So just in terms of just in terms of connecting our overview of attachment theory and polyvagal theory, it's our relationship with children. It's the co-regulation that happens between our nervous system and theirs that literally lays down the neural architecture for them to develop as healthy humans, to learn self-regulation. It regulates their physiological and emotional states. It facilitates the development of different brain and cognition and biochemistry. Modulates different gene expression depending on how their autonomic nervous system reacts and the different chemicals that are released into their bloodstream. As a result, they learn who they are, they learn their value and their worth as a unique person by the way we respond to when they express that, and they learn the meaning of the rules of the world around them. What is it that they can expect from the world if this is the quality of relationship I have with you? I'm going to move along again. I want to make sure we have some time for questions here. And I just wanted to reiterate again, the power of one. I don't know the time extent that you typically spend with the different children you serve, but in research, it does show that at least one positive adult relationship, whether it's your teacher, your coach, your aunt, your uncle, your neighbor, your advocate, one positive adult relationship can in fact shift the trajectory of a child's life. So that's the hope that I hope you take away with, that you come away with today. So I just want to come into how can we serve these kids in terms of how do we then be trauma informed and trauma responsive. So if a child is in a sympathetic state, again, this is when they are detecting a danger or threat in their environment. So eye contact may not be welcome at first, and that's not personal. It could also be happening to an emotion they're having within themselves that they don't understand. But something that is very important is validating their experience. Validating their experience does not mean condoning behavior, but validating the emotions that they're experiencing gives a sense of alliance. So it fulfills this us versus them consciousness that comes with the fight or flight. So you can mirror for them in statements, wow, you must be so frustrated right now. That must feel so lonely. Oh, your head must want to explode, or I cannot imagine how you feel. You know, when you share this, or positive things, when you share this, I can feel joy in my own body, you know, so just mirroring back their experience and statements. And you can also match them in energy and gesture. Notice I'm not saying state, so don't become dysregulated with them. But if someone says, I'm so angry, you can be like, wow, what I'm hearing is you're really angry. So matching them in that, again, it brings this sense of alliance. When we feel seen in these dysregulated states, it helps us to come out of them much quicker. You could try helping them identify what was the cause of the state, but also sometimes communication is not engaged because our frontal cortex is not fully online. So movement is really great. And this can also include, you know, do you want to draw how you feel? Do you want to color how you feel? What kind of sound matches how you feel? Is there an animal that matches how you feel right now? You can utilize the energy that's moving through their body in a way that allows them to move through that energy, burn that energy off. And it also makes them feel like they have someone in there. There's the co-regulation piece. Now you're bringing the ventral vagal back online. You can also point them out to their environment. Let's find 5 red cars, or let's, what are 3 different sounds we can hear? You know, those different environmental sensory sorting exercises. And once they have come out of the experience, then you can reflect on it with them. But when someone is in a state of dysregulation, it's not the time to really discuss what's going on. So in terms of a shutdown state, again, body awareness might be uncomfortable, eye contact might be uncomfortable. One of the most important things here actually is minimal words, because they're really far away from their cognition, their frontal cortex. So just sitting with them physically and being that ventral presence, co-regulating presence, can help them sort of thaw, if you will. You can think of them as frozen in this state. So get down on their level, just sit with them, arm to arm, back to back, or just be in the room with them without demanding any more of them than they're capable of giving in the moment. Relaxing imagery, rhythmic music, gentle rhythmic movement, all of these different things can help soothe that part and speak the language that we're capable of speaking when we're in a shutdown state. You might find when they are moving out of that state that they might get a burst of energy. They might start crying. They might start wanting to run around. That's actually a good sign. That means they're coming up the ladder again. They're one step closer to ventral. And again, when they feel ready, when they're back in a state of regulation, you can discuss or reflect on what they experienced. I also want to just mention these doorways to ventral. So there's all these different ways we can access the vagus nerve and stimulate the vagus nerve and bring it back online. So engaging with the hands, and you can get creative in any way you want. Play-Doh, Legos, cold water on the palms, pushing up against the wall, using the vocal cords, singing, humming, oohing, drinking water. Skin, so hugs, sitting back to back, acupressure points, a soft or a weighted blanket, an ice pack on your wrists or your neck. The eyes, so you can look at a glitter tube. That's something they like to do in the classroom. Look at sparkle lights, look at picture books. Oh, you can use a weighted eye mask. You can also instruct them to find something in the room that they like looking at. Let them lead themselves. Also the face, cupping the face, massaging the face, but also making faces can be fun. So again, that animal experience, like, you know, it helps complete that stress response when we bring it up into our face. Ears, rhythmic music, rhythmic beats, reminds us of the heartbeat that we heard when we were in the womb. Also just resonates and entrains our own heartbeat. So different soundscapes, gently massaging the ears can be a good one as well. Breath is a great one. Typically when our heart rate will drop on our out breath. So if we have slow, long out breaths, that will bring our parasympathetic, our ventral vagal back online. And with kids, you can breathe in through the nose and pretend you're breathing into a straw. You can breathe in through the nose, pretend you're blowing up balloons, or maybe you have real balloons. And then you have feet. So you can massage the feet. You can walk on textured mats. You can play hopscotch. You can dance. You can walk. You can jog. Anything to move the feet and the legs. Then I also wanted to touch on self-care. So of course, you taking care of yourself means that you can be a better co-regulatory presence for children that are around you and adults that are around you. So self-tracking, so becoming aware of your own state as it shifts moment to moment, and befriending your own nervous system. So instead of meeting your nervous system with judgment, remember, your nervous system is 500 million years old, and having some compassion and being more curious and asking yourself questions in the similar way you would ask a child. So you also have just tracking your own stress and burnout. So I call this yellow flags and red flags. So yellow flags is like, when am I stressed? Like, I'm not overly stressed, but I'm stressed. And then red flags, I'm totally burnt out. And by learning what your different increments of stress are, you'll be able to make choices depending on the state you're in. And maybe you can't take on something additional, and you need to engage in rest and restoration. The ventral doorways that we just went over. So do you need to calm your nervous system? Are you in a state of sympathetic and you need to calm, or are you in a state of shutdown? You need to gently bring some energy into your nervous system. So again, knowing how to also regulate as needed. Ventral anchors are really great. These are sort of like ways of evoking regulation in the moment by using the mind. So can you think of a person, an animal, a place, a memory, an image, anything that you can call forth and just, it relaxes you in the moment. These are great on the go tricks, that particular one. Glimmers are great as well. Glimmers are Deb Dana's work, and she talks about really small moments throughout the day. It's the opposite of what we might call a microaggression, right? These are micronutrients for the nervous system, glimmers. So seeing a bee land on a flower, watching a child laugh as they run through a playground, seeing someone hold the door open for a senior citizen, your favorite song comes on the radio, whatever it is. Deb Dana says, see, make sure to stop, make sure to actually appreciate and absorb that into your nervous system. And then to bring a co-regulatory experience in, share. So tell someone, text someone, or call someone. And she actually has glitter chats where everyone will send the different glitters that they experience. And then restorative practices. And what I mean by this is just different activities and exercises that very clearly soothe your nervous system. This could be knitting, this could be hiking, this could be pottery, this could be a book club, whatever it is. Who cares what it is? As long as it's safe and it works for you, recognizing those practices and engaging in them over the long term as a way to restore your nervous system on a regular basis. And then community care, I just want to say too, is really important. We heal in community. So becoming aware of the nervous system states around you, noticing the different shifts in the people around you. Co-regulation, are you capable in this moment of anchoring ventral? And if you are, being a ventral presence for those who might need it, right? In the moment, being that regulatory presence when others might be in a dysregulated state. And really being in an environment where all nervous system states and feelings are welcome, but of course with children and adults too, reinforcing that how we express those states or how we act towards others when we're in those states, of course, requires regulation. We do need to respect others. Approach children with pace, playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, empathy. You'd be so surprised if you just ask cool, inquisitive questions, what can come forward there. Again, glimmers. And then as you're participating in terms of your job with children, notice what naturally brings a child alive. Notice what naturally calms them down. Different groups, different play areas, different activities, and help to reinforce those, encourage them, because they are very soothing for the child's nervous system. I just very briefly want to cover handle with care. The DA already did, but we are training police officers and other first responders that should they arrive at the scene and notice that a child is present or lives at the home, then they will send a confidential notification to the school that arrives morning next day with just 3 words: handle with care and the child's name. And so the school is able to have a hands-off but very aware understanding that the child may have gone through something traumatic. They do not know the details. All they need to know is if a shift happens in that child, it might be due to trauma, and we can be more supportive for them in the moment. And then should mental health professionals need to be called, then that's an additional resource that partnerships with schools and mental health professionals can provide for families. And it's important to note here that a handle with care notice absolutely does not replace a 51A. If it just is a notification that can be submitted in addition. And this is a really cool map that shows all the different areas in the country. As of June 2023, she's sending me a new map shortly. It's becoming a nationwide program, so it's really special. So I'm going to stop sharing. I know we've come a little bit over time here, and I just want to open it up for questions or discussions. Any comments you have, I'd love to hear.
I'm just going to start. I am so impressed with the Handle with Care program. An amazing presentation, by the way. I'm just, soaking it all in and taking notes. But the Handle with Care, when I first heard about it, I was like, I just want to promote it, be involved in it somehow. I worked in the school system for 25 years, and I can't say enough how it would have helped so many kids, looking back. It's just a wonderful program. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's a really great educational piece where misunderstandings of what we might have thought as character flaws or volitional behaviors, they're not personal. And they're just simply, it could be the outcome of a child who lives at home with a tiger, if you will. So this allows schools to be an environment that can actually buffer against the traumas that a child may experience at home.
This was tremendous. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, I know that we record it and we put it onto our YouTube channel and we can go back and access that at any time. But do you ever share your PowerPoint slides? I was just looking at a few of them and thought they would maybe be helpful for our advocates to carry on as they're out in the field working with kids.
Yes, I do get that question a lot, and we are working on, what can we send out for people? Yeah. Jordan, if you actually want to send me the specific slides that you thought would be helpful, send me an email and we can work on that together.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Is it C? C. Hi, C. First of all, thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it, but I also see you had a question about TBI.
Yeah, so I've sobbed through this whole thing. I am not emotionally regulated, as you can all see, because I'm very emotionally affected by all this. But I really want to be a helpful person to not only children, but also adults that were previously children who dealt with this. And I'm 45 years old. Our generation really went through a lot. A lot of us, the crack epidemic affected my generation. So these are people that are now in their 40s who have reactive attachment disorder and all of these like really severe things. And everything in this presentation makes perfect sense. So I appreciate that. And one of the biggest things that is an issue, whether it be people that were fighting in Afghanistan or Iraq, or people that were formerly in gangs and experienced a lot of physical trauma, brain damage, they're brain damaged people. And now I'm thinking children who are physically assaulted and go through terrible things. What can we do for kids that this model is, if a brain is functioning properly? If somebody has brain damage, what hope is there to kind of work with them moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, TBI is a very nuanced field, so I don't want to misspeak, but of course, our nervous system will often be over programmed, if you will. If you think of it again as a muscle, the amygdala will become hypersensitive to the things in their environment. Different dysfunction in the prefrontal cortex that allows the dampening and the control of our emotional systems. So first and foremost, we're not expecting anyone to be a mental health professional. That is, of course, a professional field. So if children need that level of care, then they need that level of care. But I think that I've also found, because we also discussed this in terms of neurotypical children who also have autism. And we see in that demographic that there's a lot more movement and humming and singing, but really there's a deep intelligence to those behaviors. It may not be the same range of what we can consider socially acceptable or convenient, but their nervous system is employing different things that will in fact regulate their nervous system. So whether it's TBI or a neurotypical child, I think that at the end of the day, every nervous system yearns to connect, even if at first it's quite scary because it was not familiar to them in life. And so I think just the element of continued patience and perhaps research with those specific areas and those specific populations, like the ventral vagal system still wants to come online, still wants to be fed.
Like adaptation, sort of adapt in whatever way.
Yes, exactly. Adapting. So it may not be that you can get as intimate in a healthy way, it might take more time. So the road may be a little longer, but I do think that every nervous system is just yearning to connect. There's that African proverb, which is like the child that isn't welcomed by the village will burn it down, just feel its warmth. Yes. So any sense of acknowledgement, yep. Any sense of connection. I mean, we really do drink these up, even if socially we might reject them out of a flight response or a fight response. That nervous system received that, and it was in fact nourishing. So continued patience and continued bravery, to go up against those energies with those populations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Roxanne, thank you so much. Glad you enjoyed it.
Any other questions or comments? I know that was a lot to soak in, so even if you don't have a question now and you think of something later, feel free to please just send me an email, and I have connection with Sue at this point, so I can either connect you with her or ask her myself.
Yes, I'm going to drop my email in the chat there. So if anyone would like to reach out with questions, or if there are any other agencies or schools, teachers, admin that you feel would welcome this information in another presentation, please let me know. And Jordan, reach out. We can work on the details that we discussed too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much. Like I said, this was tremendous. I cannot say it enough. It's so valuable for us to have as we send our volunteers. Oh, Bruce, I'm sorry. I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was trying to find that little hand flag thing, but I can't find it. But in any case, Sue, I want to thank you actually for filling up my tank. The tank that I use to assure myself that I have the ability to make a difference, because you often wonder whether or not you are making a difference, because you're only with these people sometimes for a very short period of time. So to hear from a professional that it does make a difference is very reassuring. So thanks for filling up my tank.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. You just filled up mine with that comment. I'm so glad that you found it valuable. And you guys are absolutely, like the DA said, doing God's work. And it really takes a microsecond for humans to connect. And we may not know the extent of the value that provided for somebody else, but we feel it when we receive it from others. So every little drop counts. Rashmi, thank you so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
All right. Well, again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please let me know, let Sue know if you guys need anything, and then Yeah, we will go from there. Again, thank you so much. Sue, thank you. Ellen, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.